Meanwhile, his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, used her conference speech to warn of a hurricane to come on migration, but claimed that the Tories are the only party who will take effective action.
Now, I can't pretend that politicians have done a great job of managing immigration for the last 30 years. We were too slow to recognise the scale of the problem, too unwilling to accept that our legal framework needed to be updated. And let's be honest, far too squeamish about being smeared as racist to properly bring order to the chaos. But under Rishi Sunak's leadership, things are changing.
Let's go straight to Manchester now and speak to our political editor, Peter Cardwell. Peter, I've promised my viewers and listeners that you will tell us what's really going on behind the bravura performances professing that A is occurring when we can pretty much see and feel that B is really occurring. So first of all, I think I might ask quite a simple question. What does Rishi Sunak, what do the Tories want us to think is happening at the conference? Then I'm going to ask you, what the heck is really happening at the conference?
Well, Vanessa, I think what they want us to be talking about are their big announcements on justice, on health, on housing, on education, but we're not talking about that at all. We're talking about the fact that HS2 is dominating this conference, that a decision hasn't been made. Rishi Sunak did a number of interviews today. He was asked quite straightforwardly, the whole point of this conference is supposed to be about long-term decisions for a better future. That is the slogan of this conference. They have it on the mugs that are on sale behind me here. Yet a big long-term decision is about HS2, and we don't know what that decision is. We expect that he will say that it has been cancelled, but we don't know for sure, and that's been denied by Downing Street that it has been cancelled already. He talks about a united party. There is absolutely no way the Conservative Party is united. Suella Braverman's speech, for example, absolutely fascinating. She strayed into all sorts of areas that are nothing to do with being Home Secretary. Net zero, for example. Wokeness, maybe a little bit to do with being Home Secretary, but lots of other things as well. That was a leadership speech, if ever I've seen one. The mood here is relatively calm, not too last year, for example, with Liz Truss, it was a very chaotic conference. It's chaotic in terms of the message because there's a lot the government and the Conservative Party want us to be talking about, but we're not talking about it. We're seeing their divisions, we're seeing their indecision, and we're seeing Rishi Sunak, who is the Prime Minister, under a lot of pressure. He has a big, big job tomorrow in this conference speech to pull it out of the bag.
You will be able to tell me what is supposed to be happening behind the scenes at this juncture to head off at the pass all the negative coverage that is now falling torrentially upon the heads of Rishi Sunak and his cabinet and the government about this leaked HS2 story. If you had been still in the position you used to be as a SPAD, behind the scenes rather than reporting on the scenes, what's supposed to kick into gear to get the conference back on the rails and get the agenda that the party wants to be first and foremost in the headlines rather than the one it doesn't want?
I think there needs to be clarity, and often when there is a leak you can do very little but react to it in some way. Rishi Sunak has chosen not to react. He's chosen to wait until the speech in tomorrow morning when he'll talk about HS2. He has to say something about it. Here he is in Manchester. He'll give a speech just a few hundred yards behind me in a conference hall which is quite literally in a shed that used to house trains that were sort of overnight, where Manchester is of course part of that HS2 line. But certainly when there's a big leak with Net Zero, for example, that was a straightforward, disgruntled civil servant who leaked that story. He had to react, he brought a speech forward and he put his announcement out. The problem is that the Prime Minister has a very clear and organised schedule of what to do at the party conference. There are certain things that he does on certain days. On the Tuesday, he usually does interviews. On the Wednesday, for example, he will give the speech. That's the very last thing that will happen here. So had he come out and given it all away and opened the box and told everybody what was inside on Monday or Tuesday, well, then he wouldn't have it for Wednesday. But the fact is that we're just talking about it. It's chaotic. The messaging, the communications from his aides and from his party just not really hitting the spot at the moment. And there's a lot that others are sort of jumping into that, like Suella Braverman, for example, making big headlines today and portraying herself certainly as a potential successor to Rishi Sunak.
Let's talk about Suella Braverman, because we can't really avoid talking about her. She's absolutely front and centre of everything at the moment. And for many people, I imagine, it's felt that she's pretty much reprising, if not repeating, the speech that she made in Washington only the other day. It got an enormous amount of coverage all over the world at the time. It was absolutely focused on migration and immigration. It was very similar in tone, wasn't it, to the speech that she just made today. But, as you say, she's kind of extended her parameters. There's almost no end at all to the subjects that she feels it behoves her to broach and to have a view on and to take a stand on and to kind of set the tone on. I mean, she certainly is, I think some people might say, embroidering her part somewhat, isn't she?
Oh, absolutely, Vanessa. And it's interesting, cabinet ministers, even very senior cabinet ministers like the Home Secretary, are meant to speak for about 12 or 13 minutes. She spoke for about double that length of time. She got a standing ovation, a hall not entirely full, but basically full. A lot of her fellow cabinet members have not, excuse me, have not actually managed to fill a hall, but she has. And actually, the leadership pitch that she was putting forward went way beyond what her brief was or lots of other things that she brought in. Certainly she was talking about some of those messages that she talked about in Washington, but lots of other things as well. So really for Suella Braverman, I think this was a very important day, and I think people will look back on it as the time that she really launched her ambition to be the leader of the Conservative Party, because it's not quite a foregone conclusion. Lots can change, but all the polls indicate that the Conservatives will lose the next election and then there'll be a vacancy.
Tell me about the heckler. I mean, he's known to all of us, isn't he? He's Mr. Andrew Boff of the London Assembly. What was he heckling about? What got his goat so badly?
Well, he's the chairman of the London Assembly for the Conservatives, and certainly Andrew Boff, I've interviewed him before, I'm sure you've interviewed him as well, Vanessa, and he's someone who is a well-known Conservative. In fact, he went for Mayor of London a few times. He didn't get it, he didn't make the final three for the shortlist that Susan Hall is now the candidate for Mayor of London, but certainly he is gay, he is on the left of the Conservative Party, and he wasn't happy with the messages that Suella Braverman was talking about in terms of immigration. She said previously that there are some people who say that they're gay and therefore they may be trying to game the system or say that they're oppressed because they're gay and they should therefore get asylum. That's in a very small minority of cases, but certainly Andrew Boff and Suella Braverman are not on the same page in terms of their politics, despite the fact that they're in the same party, and people might find that hard to believe, but every party is basically a coalition of people who are in all different factions, all different ideas. And Suella Braverman showing herself again today very much on the right of the Conservative Party, Andrew Boff very much on the more liberal left wing of the Conservative Party, Tory Reform Group, One Nation Conservatives, that sort of side of things. So he heckled her within the speech. He was asked to leave the hall, and he's now actually been asked to leave the entire secure zone around the conference centre. So he has left and he won't be back for conference. It's interesting actually, there's a Gay Tories event tonight, LGBT Conservatives event. There's a grouping within the Conservative Party that he is part of. They have an event tonight that will certainly be a very different affair to what it would have been previously.
Right. Tell me about Kemi Badenoch, because front page story today, she says there's no better country in the world to live if you're black. And obviously, you know, that's going to be something that some people will profoundly agree with and some people will think is untrue. What's she doing? In the same way that Suella Braverman's kind of staking her claim and setting out her boundaries, is Kemi Badenoch doing the same thing for the same reason?
Yeah, Kemi Badenoch has not been nearly as high profile as Suella Braverman at this conference, but certainly that kind of language and her sort of anti-woke views are quite similar, actually, to Suella Braverman in many ways, although the two women have slightly different politics. But it's interesting from Kemi Badenoch's view, because she may well be a rival to Suella Braverman in the next year or so, when there is almost certainly going to be an election in the Conservative Party for leadership. So she is setting out her stall now. She's saying things that she knows will get headlines, and yes, it's a perfectly reasonable argument to make, and she's saying that there are, as she has said on numerous occasions, that there is a kind of victim mentality in many people, and we need to kind of break out of that. We need to talk about opportunities, and Britain not just being a good place for black people to live, but for everyone to live, taking back the kind of pride in Britain. Suella Braverman was talking about that as well in her speech today, because there is very much a sense that there is a sort of anti-Britain narrative, a sort of post-Brexit, actually we're not that big a deal in the world anymore, we're not connected to Europe, let's do Britain down. And both Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman want that to be a much bigger, and want to kind of reverse that and talk about pride and patriotism in Britain.
You said that there was a message on justice that the Tories would like to get out and would like us to have focused on. As it's been completely overtaken by HS2 and everything else, maybe you'll tell us what it is, and then we can decide whether we want to take it seriously or not.
Yeah, this is Alex Chalk, who is the Lord Chancellor, the Justice Secretary. He's talking today in his speech about the fact that he doesn't believe that it's a thing that campaigners have been calling for some time, that if you're an abusive husband in a relationship, sometimes a wife, but mostly a husband in a relationship, that you can lose access to your children. That is something that a lot of people have been calling for some time. But that is, I think, indicative, symbolic of a lot of things that are going on at this conference. A lot of the policy the Conservative Party are talking about are things that actually don't involve spending money. There are changes to things like, for example, not having trans women on women-only medical wards, for example, in hospitals. So there are numerous aspects of this and many policies that the fact is the tax burden is so high and the Treasury keeps saying no to things. So it's interesting from that perspective that there are quite a few policies that, yes, they're symbolic, they're important for many people. Of course, you would never want an abusive father to have access to someone he can go on to abuse again. But those kind of measures often don't involve the Treasury handing out money.
We are going to be discussing that actually later on in the programme. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you.